Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it is a good morning, whether it's a good morning because you were here yesterday afternoon and we had a tremendously fun auction party, or good morning because the Vols beat Alabama, jeez, or just because it's a beautiful fall. It's a little rainy, but it's fall in East Tennessee. So, welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. We are officially a welcoming congregation. We've always thought we were, but we are now officially welcoming everyone who wants a place for community, for thought, for exploring in a little more depth, who wants a place in service to each other and to the wider community. I'm Suzanne Molnar. I'm a member of the worship committee, and I'm the worship associate for today. And this morning, our service from Reverend Carol Boudreau asks the question of, what's a congregation and do we need one? So, we have a number of announcements. They're in your order of service. If you're joining us online, they are posted there also, so I'll be brief, but just to note, the Reproductive Justice Forum, 10:30, no, sorry, that's why I need these, 12:30 on the 23rd, here, to get us thinking about who we are as UUs and how we want to impact and serve our community in that regard. We'll host a Soem celebration October the 30th, outdoors at 6:30. Arts and crafts at Westside will be starting this week, starting November the 5th, sorry. Westside would like to welcome its artists, including budding closets and wish we were artists. And the first meeting will be Saturday, November 5th, and that will be first Saturdays of the month from there on in the adult RE room. Then, anybody here or online or anywhere in the world who has not been to Pickett State Park, you have missed something really, really special, and Pickett in the fall is even a cut above its normal. It is gorgeous. It's a wonderful place to be, and being out there with the rest of the congregation is just inspiring. We have sign-up sheets, and Reverend Carol's going to talk a little more about that. That is the second weekend in November. And finally, the book group, continuing to read the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie for the next meeting, which is the first Saturday in December. And Reverend Carol has more announcements. Oh, I can take it. Well, Anne, yeah, I asked Anne to, is she here?
Anne, would you like to give us an auction update as well?
Thank you.
I thanked many people as they came in yesterday saying, thank you for coming to the pregame party. Yeah, that was quite a surprise, also with Reverend Carol, that even though I saw in the newspaper for a couple of weeks or so about the big game coming, it never went together until a few days before, when it's like, oh, it's the big game. And as some of you read in the newsletter, it became my parallel universe, stressing over the auction and people showing up and also the big game. Anyway, I think we did pretty good. We just were under $4,000, and not bad for post-quarantine and getting back together again live. So thank you very much, everybody that was here yesterday to party and also found things they wanted to have afterwards. Thank you.
And a big thank you. Yes, a big thank you to Anne and to Shirley Vogel and to Suzanne and Bob and Lori Valaga and Jerry and Alice and everyone who did anything to help make that happen. It was wonderful. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. For those of you who are visiting us virtually attending, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Reverend Carol Bedeau. I am privileged to serve here as minister. A couple of little additions to the announcements. So the first one is in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks from now. So next Sunday, we have our Reproductive Justice Forum. On the back table, for those of you who are here in person, there is a list of questions that we've been including in our newsletter during the last few weeks to help sort of spark that conversation. For those of you who are with us virtually, you can get those online on our website. That's next Sunday. The following Sunday, on the 30th, is our All Souls Sunday morning service. On All Souls, which is sort of the Christian holiday that is celebrated around Halloween, on All Souls, we remember those who have passed. This can be animals or loved ones who are humans. And you are invited, if you're going to be here in person, to bring photographs or mementos of loved ones who have passed. And we will actually create a sort of altar of photos, kind of like a Dia de los Muertos ofrenda. We'll create a place to put those photos as we remember people and beloved animals. And if you are attending virtually, you can email those to our office, and our office administrator, Brad, will be putting together a photo montage for our online participants as well. So even if you're going to be here in person, you can still email in photos to be included in that montage. For Picket, which is a couple weeks after that in November, we had planned something called Spirit Quest in the spring, which we had to cancel. Spirit Quest is going to be a very specific, focused set of activities at Picket for people who want to participate in them. That will include some gathering on Friday evening, part of Saturday, and a little bit on Sunday. That's going to be focused on deep inner reflection and authenticity in ourselves connected to the earth. That's optional, but on the sign-up forms, you will see that if you are interested in participating in the Spirit Quest activities, there's a little bit of a schedule, and there's also a place where you can just say, yes, I want to be included in Spirit Quest. So just take note of that, whether you're signing up in person or virtually. All right, Suzanne, is that all the announcements?
As far as I know, unless somebody else has one.
Elizabeth has one. Come on up, come on up.
Okay, I have a good voice.
But we want you to be on camera, Elizabeth, so come on up.
So a few weeks ago in the back corner, I had some cards available and we didn't quite finish up writing them. We're writing just nice greeting cards to people who used to be a big part of our church, like Fred Wetling in Texas and Marcine Ziegler, who no longer are able to be here because they've moved away, but also to older people and younger people, I guess, also, who are a part of our church but are no longer really coming very often, such as Emily Loper or Ariel Reno-Demick. And so I have a few more cards that we can finish up in the corner after church.
For those of you who don't actually know why Elizabeth gets to come up here so often, and you might not know this in our virtual community, Elizabeth is our membership coordinator. So she's the person who handles all things membership-oriented.
I see someone gave me an events coordinator title.
Ooh, events coordinator. Ooh.
Which was not discussed with
Interesting. A promotion, a non-approved promotion. Yeah. We'll talk about that at the board meeting today. All right, as we finish up with the announcements, let us take a breath and enjoy Sandra's beautiful gathering music. She's playing Autumn Leaves this morning. Thank you, Sandra. So our bowl is a way that every week we call ourselves fully present into this room. When the bowl sounds, we are inviting ourselves to become present. Today we're talking about being together. So as I invite the bowl to sound, what I'd like to invite you to do is something a little different this time. I'm going to sound the bowl 3 times, invite it to sing 3 times. On the first sounding, I invite you to notice yourself. Just notice yourself. And then on the other 2 times that the bowl sounds, I invite you to look around the room and notice who you're with.
Words for chalice lighting are from Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled to a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
So today we're going to be talking about what it means to be a congregation, to be a gathered body of people who come together for something. And we're going to start with some words from Tom Rainer, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about what the purpose of a church is. These are words from Tom Rainer, who's a researcher and consultant on congregations. He talks about how to build healthy churches. And I will say that Tom Rainer I'm personally really found him inspirational. His words give us a lot to think about as we consider our own gathering, our own congregating. So I've combined a few of his messages about congregations. He says this: "We will never find joy in church membership when we are constantly seeking things our way. Paradoxically, we will find the greatest joy when we choose to be last. Passion means making the choice to do that for which we can make the greatest difference. It means saying no to opportunities that may be good, but not the best. It means that the best path is not always the easiest path." Now, when I read that, I think it means putting the greater good first. That's essential. When people come together, he's reminding us that there's a common greater good. If we're coming together as a gathered body, there's something that transcends the individual preference, the individual need that holds us together. He goes on, if we approach church membership from the perspective of entitlement, he says, we have it upside down. You should always ask first what you can do for your church. Isn't it interesting? This more generous frame of mind and heart shifts our perspective on being here at all. Finally, he says this: church membership is a gift that must be treasured. It should not be taken for granted or considered lightly, because it is a gift. We must always be thankful for it.
We'll now take an offering for the support of this, our beloved village. We all need a village, and it really is. And our Share the Plate partner is SI, or C, which means Serving Immigrants. It's an organization here in East Tennessee that helps immigrant families as needed to get mental health clinicians or immigration lawyers. So if you can, please help support us and support them. 25% of otherwise undesignated funds goes to C. If viewing this online, you may donate through the website by clicking the donate button.
So, okay, how many of you watched the end of the game yesterday? Talk about a congregation. That was some serious congregating going on. For those of you who did not have the privilege or the, I don't know what to call it, of observing the end of the game yesterday, the Alabama Vols game, we have respect, I'm going to say, we have respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all Alabama fans, players, and Alabamans. Can I get a little bit of a for that? Okay, thank you, Vols. But the game was a big game, all right? A lot of people spent a lot of time preparing to congregate at that game. And when the game ended with that kick, the loaf of bread sailing across the field goal in the last 1 second, as they said, it wasn't pretty, but it was beautiful. Then the congregation got on their feet and moved onto the field, tore down the field goal. Craziness happened. It's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about why do people congregate, to gather together. So yesterday, I was sort of observing the practice of congregating. Some of us congregated yesterday for an auction. It was a social event, but it was also a fundraiser, right? We gathered for that purpose. Some people are like, I do not want to go to an auction, thank you very much. Other people are like, yeah, that's really fun. We congregate at sporting events. Right? And in this part of the world, people are pretty serious about congregating for their sporting events. I was listening to NPR this morning on the way here, and they were talking about the prison fire in Iran that happened yesterday, and talking about the protests that continue in Iran. And I was thinking about that kind of congregating, when people gather to protest in the face of violence, with the courage, knowing that people will die and people will go to prison in horrible circumstances, they still choose to gather for some reason. Gathering is a human need. We come together for different reasons at different times, and each of us individually has different kinds of comfort levels around congregating. Okay, some of us are more introverted and have no interest in being in a crowd. The idea of being in Neyland Stadium yesterday makes me almost nauseous to think about being caught in that. Other people can't think of anything they would like better. Okay? So we have different levels of comfort with congregating and what size of congregation we want to be in and the kinds of situations in which we want to be with others. Some of us only want to be with others in certain kinds of environments. Others of us want to be with other people whenever possible. But this idea of going from being just with ourselves or one other person to gathering in groups, congregating, is something that is simply part of being human. Here in this building, we choose to congregate. congregations can look a lot of different ways. Now, it used to be that congregating for religious communities, whether that was a church or a temple or whatever it was, it used to be that the people doing that were all in one place at one time together. That is no longer true. Our congregational gatherings now include people who are not in this room, and also people who will be participating in this service not today, but at a different time. So the nature of congregating, particularly for religious organizations, also true for educational organizations and corporations and all kinds of things, the way we gather is changing dramatically. Okay? The world is different than it was 50 years ago around congregating. So we talked a couple of weeks ago about how that affects churches, how the changes in our society affect churches. So I'm going to give a little recap for anybody who is listening to this service and didn't hear what we said a couple weeks ago about that. In the last few weeks, we've talked about how American society has been changing dramatically, and that has caused the role of religious communities in general, but also specifically UU congregations and churches to change. One of the unique roles of UU churches in the past used to be creating a safe and welcoming place for intellectuals, particularly non-religious intellectuals, to congregate, while still being able to participate in the social benefits of church, belonging to a church, the fellowship, the community. Now, one of the things we talked about is that need for a safe place for intellectuals, non-religious intellectuals to congregate, that is decreasing as a need in our society, because there are so many other ways for people to get intellectual stimulation and to gather to share intellectual information. In fact, one of the things that's really true with the internet is that many of us actually need rest from information and intellectual stimulation, because all we have to do is ask a question and then we go down the rabbit hole for the next 3 hours, right? So we actually have a little bit of an information overload in our society right now. The other unique role that UU churches have historically played in American society is as agents of social change. And as our own internal denominational studies show, and also broader research data shows, this is still an extremely important role for UU churches in our world. Tom Rainer, who was the author who I just quoted, and he wrote these 2 books that we have been talking about and the board has been studying, Autopsy of a Deceased Church and Anatomy of a Revived Church, reminds us that some of the traditional ways churches have been functioning are changing, and this is causing a sharp decline in churches in our society, that successful churches going into the 21st century need to be looking outward rather than inward. We need to be engaged in our social world, in what's happening, and in our communities. So, the need for information and intellectual stimulation from a church specifically is declining. The changes in our society are actually kind of amping up the pressure for social transformation and social change movements. But after the last service, there was one other thing that came up that I was actually saving for today, but a number of people brought it up after that service when we talked about those changes. A number of people said to me, there's one other really important role for UU churches, UU congregations, and that's a role that's not unique to Unitarian Universalist religious communities, but it is the unique nature of religious community. And that is spiritual experience. A number of people said to me, I want spiritual experiences. Now, how we define that may vary from person to person, and some of us may say, I don't want no spiritual experience. But this is also an increasing need, social need, and an increasing role of UU congregations in our world. It is the role of the church or the religious community to be the place where spiritual experience is part of the deal. Many people today come to UU churches seeking a place to have spiritual experiences, and that is a change from the dominant mode of mid-20th century Unitarian Universalism. Okay? That is a historical change. During the 20th century, our congregation saw a significant shift away from religious and spiritual experiences as part of Unitarianism and Universalism towards not doing that. So remember that Unitarianism and Universalism were places that were religious or spiritual centers. And then in the early to mid 20th century, secular humanism and ethical atheism became central to what UU congregations did. During that period, our congregations were very much trying to provide something other than a spiritual experience because of the associations with that. I have a wonderful story about this. In probably I'm not sure what year it was, beginning of this century, beginning of the 21st century, somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, I attended a general assembly, my first general assembly of our denomination. It's the big meeting, the big conference. And I went to general assembly. I was new, I was naive, and I attended a discussion. I was a religious education director at the time, and I attended this discussion. And I stood up to say something about something, I don't even remember what, and I used the word worship. I just said, well, when we do our worship services, the kids do blah, blah, blah. And about 4 of the elders in the room stood up and read me the riot act for about 10 minutes. You do what? You have worship in your church? We don't, what are you doing to our children? I mean, they were angry, they were furious. Because the associations of traditional conventional religion were so upsetting to them that to associate what we did in a UU congregation with anything that looked like religious or spiritual was really upsetting to them. This is part of what happened historically to Unitarian Universalism. But like 19th century Universalism and Unitarianism, particularly the branch of Unitarianism that was the Transcendentalist movement, our movements have roots in spiritual and religious experiences. And the pendulum is swinging back that way because so many people that come through our doors don't have any bad experiences with church, and they're seeking spiritual experiences. So that's a broad historical movement that we need to be aware of. Most of us as Unitarian Universalists or new to Unitarian Universalism are familiar with the 7 principles. We've seen those 7 principles in the hymnal, we see it on the websites, we see it on our order of service, I believe, but we also have these things we call the 6 sources. Okay? The 6 sources are the places where we get our inspiration and our sort of models. They include other world religions. They include science. They include what we call the prophetic words and deeds of women and men who've changed the world. They include nature, inspiration from the natural world. But the 6th source is the one that, as a denomination, we have been averse to for the last little while. And it is direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, spiritual experiences. This is something that other religious movements totally take for granted. It's not unique to Unitarian Universalism, but it is something that the role of a community that congregates on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday evening or whenever they do it, when they congregate as not a business, not a book club, but something that's something else that looks like a religious community, they take for granted. There is a huge movement in Unitarian Universalism back towards spiritual experience, okay? Up until the mid-20th century, that was taken for granted in Unitarianism and Universalism, and the pendulum is swinging back towards that. Think about it this way. In the past, our larger world was primarily religious. And people who were not religious, which in the last century meant lots and lots of Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists, people who weren't religious, who were not interested in religious dogma, those people needed a place to belong because the dominant society was religious. Our world has become increasingly secular. And that's partly due to the success of Unitarian Universalism, right? A lot of our movements have been to change some of the dominant modes in society to allow for a broader spectrum of ways of expressing ourselves. Despite what it feels like to live in Tennessee, okay? Despite what it feels like to live in Tennessee, our world is in fact a hugely secular place now in ways it was not. All right? Young people in our world today do not assume that they have to go to church. They don't have to. They don't necessarily have to. The vast majority of youth and young adults are exposed to a different kind of way of understanding congregating, gathering, being together. They don't feel the same kind of imperative that was true 50 years ago to belong to a religion. Where we once lived in a world that was religious and secular humanists and ethical atheists needed a home, now we live in a largely secular world where spiritual people are seeking direct, collect experiences of transcending mystery and wonder without dogma. Does that make sense? Sit with that for a minute. People are seeking those spiritual experiences without the dogma. So many people coming into UU churches now are seeking a combination of that intellectual rigor and the transcendent experience. And they're doing it in a collective way. They want to congregate with other people doing it because that amplifies the experience. In the mid to late 20th century, many UUs saw those two things, intellectual rigor and spirituality, as mutually exclusive. I'm going to let that one settle for a second. As Unitarian Universalists, we do have a trend and a habit of thinking that spirituality and intellectual rigor are mutually exclusive. But here's the thing, that is not an assumption that newer or younger UUs, or even many of us in the room today or watching this, we don't make that assumption. There's really this common thread in what is happening in Unitarian Universalism, and frankly in religious organizations as a whole. People who are congregating are looking for transformation. They're looking for inner transformation through spiritual, or call it what you will, some kind of transcendent connection and interaction, and they're looking for outer transformation of our society through engaging in collective actions for justice. This matches with our increasing understanding that people congregate to have something happen. People congregate to have an experience together, okay? It would be no fun to go to Neyland Stadium alone and shake the goalpost or smoke a cigar. It just wouldn't be the same. If you were standing in Neyland Stadium alone with your cigar, it just wouldn't be a big deal. It wouldn't. It would be no fun to be here with one other person bidding at the auction. That would be no fun. It's no fun if there's nobody to bid against, okay? And protest movements have no fuel if there aren't large groups of people doing them. When we congregate, we want something to happen that we can't make happen by ourselves. We gather for transformative experiences. Now, the inner transformations may be really subtle. For example, we may just want to experience regular reminders that we're connected to something bigger. It might be just a community, but a reminder that we're connected to a greater reality than our own personal world, helping us shift out of the day-to-day secularism, materialism, disconnection, right, of our world. Some of us may be seeking more intense inner transformations, such as those for earth-based people who are looking for ecstatic states and connections to mystical realities. Or it may be for the Christian you who is devoted to the path of Christ, but also focused on Jesus as a social reformer, right? Other UUs are Muslim or Jewish, devoted to their faith, but seeking a place where they can have that faith and also open intellectual conversation about how different traditions can meet. In so many ways, a huge percentage of people now coming into UU buildings, congregating, they're looking for ways to connect with that transcendent something. Maybe we call it the human spirit. Maybe call it love. Maybe you call it belonging. But that is also something that humans need, something bigger than themselves. The transcendent experience is one of the greatest appeals of the modern evangelical church. These churches engage in practices which are collective and ecstatic and induce a sense of transcendence. So think about, we often talk about the big evangelical churches as being like rock concerts, right? All right, so how many in this room, you do not have to raise your hand, but think about it. How many of you have sought to congregate with other people, Grateful Dead fans, rock concert friends, people at a music festival, where you are seeking a transcendent or ecstatic experience? I have been to a few Dead shows. If that ain't a religious gathering, I don't know what is. Okay? So for older Unitarian Universalists who have been attending UU congregations in this mode that is less about spiritual experience, that doesn't mean they weren't seeking spiritual experiences in other ways, with other kinds of helpers, in other settings. Right? Think about that for a minute. This is something that humans actually seek. We are increasingly needing this feeling of belonging to something bigger than ourselves in a world that encourages shallow, superficial, and materialistic ways of interacting. This is a world where connecting means followers and likes and tweets, rather than deep conversations around shared meals and rich collective experiences. These have become something that we are more and more seeking in larger collective settings. So we are congregants. And I would argue that, yes, we actually do need to congregate together. Now, many of you shared a couple of weeks ago why you come here, for things like connection, shared values, fellowship, justice, support, and many of you said later, for spiritual experiences. When we spend time together reflecting, thinking about things we wouldn't necessarily think about at other times in the week, learning to know ourselves a little more deeply. When we do that and we're willing to be transformed, to connect with something bigger and maybe be changed a little bit or a lot, when we do that, that gives us fuel for going out and transforming the world. If we don't have a sense that we belong to something bigger, something that holds us, whether it's a community of friends or a commitment to a common cause or being held in the container of, for some of us, a divine presence, or simply feeling like there's love, if we don't have that, it's hard to get up the courage and the energy to march, to send the letters, to stand up when something's going wrong. We need to know that we're part of something in order to do those things. So last time when we had a conversation about the church, we took time to share thoughts after the service about the things that we heard and learned that day. And there was one really important result of that experience. So we had our service, and at the end, we sort of let people share their thoughts and feelings. And the worship team and I got some really important feedback about that, which was this. The people in our online community pointed out how biased and prejudiced that was to certain members of the congregation over others, because we prioritize the voices of the people in this room and not our virtual congregants who are gathered with us. We got the feedback that their voices were not heard during that discussion. And we need to remedy that situation, because we do live in this age when how we congregate is different. So our virtual congregants matter just as much as those of us who are physically here right now. So in a few minutes, we're going to have our discussion as part of our service, and we're going to set it up in a way that those participants get equal voices. This shift, all right, this shift, this thing that we learned between that first conversation about churches and this conversation today and how we're going to change that, demonstrates a really important part of what Thom Rainer says we have to do if we want to survive as a 21st century congregation. First, we have to remember that the congregants, not the building, is what matters. The people matter more than how we sit together in this room. The building is just a tool. So we have to prioritize the people however they're participating. Second, and this is Thom Rainer again, we have to accept personal responsibility for change. Too often it's easy to blame someone or something else for our inability to change. I could have said, when I got that feedback, it's too hard to make that shift. That's hard. We don't know how to do that. I could have said, we don't have enough people on the worship team to do that, or there's not enough people in our virtual community to make it worth it. But that's not taking personal responsibility for the fact that more and more of the people congregating with us are doing it virtually. I and the worship team have to take responsibility for addressing that need. Ignoring their needs will not allow them to continue to congregate with us, with you, right? The virtual participants in this conversation, you matter to us. Rainer identifies a list of things that's really easy to blame when decline is happening in an institution. We can blame other institutions like the big churches stealing our people or the UUA not being helpful enough. We can blame worship styles, too modern, not modern enough, too much music, not enough music. We can often blame the pastor, not doing it right. Market demographics like the UU market in Knoxville is saturated. We can even blame the community itself for being too different than us or too hard to please or doing things a weird way. It's just too hard. Those are things that help us decline. If we want to thrive as a congregation, we have to take personal responsibility and overcome what he calls the traps of tradition. It means doing things in new ways. This is not about changing our values, but it's about changing the ways we do them. It means doing things in new ways for worship, for committees, for protocols, for procedures, for programs. Another trap of tradition is comparing the people doing the work to previous people who did the work before. It's really easy to say, well, so-and-so was really successful. When they were here, we had a lot more people. If you just did what they did, it would all work great. And we'd say that about our lay leaders, we say that about our pastors, we say it about our staff. The truth of the matter is, those people were working in a different time. We're here now. Rainer also says, finally, that being successful means dealing directly with behavior patterns that aren't serving us. Not just habits of tradition, but also behavior patterns that aren't serving us. And I'm going to just throw in here, folks, this is a little fodder for inner transformation too, right? So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, all these things we have to do for the church, who cares? This is also personal. Where inner transformation and outer transformation meet, that's where the most juice is. Moving forward in a way that allows us to connect more deeply to something bigger means dealing directly with behavior patterns that are no longer serving us. He talks about it specifically as dealing with toxic behavior patterns. And I will say that one of the patterns that UU congregations, and Westside is included in this, churches in general, is avoiding conflict. You can sit with that personally, collectively. Often we will congregate to try to work out things that we don't know how to work out personally. So, conflict avoidance is a toxic behavior and pattern that lots of us and lots of our congregations engage in. So here's what we do. When someone is upset or angry or feels left out, this is the example from the last service to this one. When someone is upset or hurt or feels left out, when there are feelings, it is often our habit to either be defensive or pretend it didn't happen. Right? Well, I could say, well, but we didn't know, and oh my gosh, and I could be defensive. Or I could say, oh yeah, okay, well, whatever. Yeah, we'll try. Neither of those is helpful. It is not healthy to pretend the upset never happened, and it is not healthy to get angry and defensive. It is healthy to address concerns directly and with compassion, to apologize, which I did, and find a specific way to address the situation, which means courage. It means being able to say, wow, I'm so sorry that did not occur to me. Gosh, you are right. That was totally biased of me. Sometimes a disagreement may not result in change. Sometimes the collected body, the congregation, the gathered people, either individually through like a direct conversation or through the board as its representatives or the leaders, may decide to leave something the way it was that someone was upset about. But even then, we're taking responsibility. So here's kind of the bottom line. We need to congregate. We're humans. How many of us have gone ahead and congregated with other people and then said, I shouldn't have done that. That wasn't what I wanted. That did not work out the way I wanted it to. I did not like that. Happens all the time. Congregating is a need and a desire we cannot escape. And conflict, change, and difficulty when we get together with other people is also completely unavoidable. Because we're people. So, what do we do? The question was, what the heck is a congregation? Well, it's a group of people who gather. Do we need that? Yes. People need that. People need to gather. But once we get that far, we have to ask, well, how in the world do we do that in a way that doesn't make us just want to leave again and start the cycle all over? So, we've had a couple of examples. People were concerned when I didn't address spirituality during our last conversation. People were concerned about the way we handled the discussion. That is normal. It is normal for things to come up when we congregate that make us have a feeling. And we as a community can develop the ability to honestly and with compassion create a greater sense of connection, a greater sense of belonging, a greater sense of being part of something bigger, even when that happens. We need to develop as a congregation of individuals who gather together the ability to connect deeply and authentically by finding ways to communicate honestly about challenges while still holding a feeling of compassion for everyone else in the building. I want you to think about that for a minute. I'm going to repeat it because it's really probably the only thing I have to say in my entire ministry. Communicating honestly and authentically about our feelings and our upsets and our hopes and our wishes and our desires and our concerns and our confusions and whatever's going on, communicating honestly and authentically about those things and our different perspectives, while still holding as our highest priority a deep feeling of connection, compassion, and commitment to each other. That is a radical act. It is the most radical thing that a congregation of people can do. If we could practice doing that in this room, and in our virtual community, and in our online gatherings, and our RE discussions, and in our book club, and in any of the ways we congregate, if we could practice honestly and authentically sharing while not trying to prove we are right or just avoiding the conversation, but instead holding that bigger thing, the love of community, the higher values, the transcendent experience. If we could do that, I want you to think about that in our society. What if our political leaders could do that? What if your family members on the other side of the political aisle could do that? What if you could do that with them? What if you could do that with your neighbors who have a sign for a different candidate in their front yard? Think about that for a minute. This isn't a small thing. The inner transformation involved in that work would necessarily result in profound outer transformation. Now, we're going to talk in our next service in this series in a few weeks. Tom Rainer has a very specific, his main suggestion for getting to that place. We're not going to talk about it today. You will have to tune in for the service that we're going to talk about that, because that service is about what my job is. What's the role of a minister? And a big part of my job is helping us get to that place. But think about the inner and outer transformation that comes from congregating where you get to be an individual fully, authentically, and honestly, while also being completely respectful and honoring of every other person's perspective. And we get to share that truly, openly, authentically, and honestly. So, now, what we're going to do last in this service, Morgan is going to assist us, if you would be willing to. Morgan's going to come up and assist us. Today, we're going to just have a little time for discussion, and then there's going to be food and coffee and wonderful things after that. But before we extinguish our chalice, we have a chance to share thoughts, feelings, opinions, responses to these ideas. And we're going to do it in a way that honors our virtual attendees as fully as those who are present in the room. So we've got a microphone up here. Instead of us coming to you in the room with the microphone, we're going to ask you to come forward so that you can actually be on the camera, so that the people who are attending virtually can see you when you participate. And we're going to alternate someone in the room getting a chance to share with. Morgan has got our live stream up on their phone, and Morgan will be reading in between people who have something from the room to say. Morgan will be reading responses from the chat from our online participants. So, Morgan, if you want to come up, let's make sure our microphone's set. Is it okay if I use the podium? You can use the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Little bit of logistics for anyone who is watching on YouTube, and maybe you don't know how to find the live chat. If you go on either the website, to the phone, whatever you're on, scroll down and there will be a button that says live chat. So if you haven't been joining us so far, please join us in there. It is about a 24-second delay, so that gives time for everybody here in the physical space with us to speak, and then I will add in things as it comes up as well, okay? As Carol has told us so many times, be brave. Be brave. Be brave. Be brave.
We can wait indefinitely. And we will wait, because, is this one on? Yeah. Because it's okay if we just need time to integrate. That's okay too.
I think that was a very good sermon, a very good presentation, and a lot to think about. One thing that came into my mind, particularly toward the end, you were talking about listening to each other and with differences, and it made me think of something I ran across recently, and I actually posted on the bottom of my computer screen so that I have to look at it often, and because I'm very guilty of what it's cautioning against. It says our main communication problem is we don't listen to understand, we listen to respond, and I'm bad about that, so I try to look at that.
All right, so it was pointed out by Lori, in order to comment and participate virtually, you will need to be signed in and subscribed for 20 minutes. I've already got notes to meet with the worship team on how we can integrate that into the service so that the next time we do this, our virtual participants can also participate. So that's just a side note. I'm going to pause so someone else can come up before I continue.
While you're thinking about whether or not you want to come up here, I want to make a comment about one of the things that is different about virtual versus in-person participation. You all in the room are used to sitting here and not being on the spot and being recipients of the service, right? We are habituated to gatherings in which we are passive receivers, right? I will tell you that the virtual people talk the whole way through. They share conversation and thoughts about what I am saying or what the worship committees do the whole time. It is an engaged conversation while this is happening. It is not a passive receiving of something that you then walk away with. It's a big, important difference, and it's obvious in the, like, everybody's sitting there like, don't make me go up. Right? Right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. During the service in the chat function, if I say something and somebody's like, I have a thought about that, it's happening while I'm talking, like right through it. Yes. There's an active conversation going on during the service. It's an engaged, experiential kind of way of congregating. Come on up.
How private is the stream?
So that's a good point. The live stream.
I can answer
it.
Like,
yeah.
So the stream itself will play later on. In order to actually see the chat, you have to be subscribed for more than 20 minutes.
I mean, like, I'm continuously being threatened to be sued, and I can't.
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes.
I'm so comfortable participating.
Yep. It's a very good question. So the question for those of you who didn't hear that, and it's a legit question, it's one we're struggling with. It's one we're really struggling with, is how do we do this participation with virtual congregants in a virtual reality when confidentiality is an issue? It's a legitimate problem. The worship team has not yet figured out how to do joys and concerns. We have not yet figured it out. We are still struggling with what do we do with joys and concerns in this context. How do we congregate and share in the way we want to share and yet do it in a virtual reality? We don't have an answer to it yet. So thank you for that question. It's a good one.
We do have a couple of comments. Like Carol said, it kind of is ongoing, so there's all kinds of things in here. One of our congregants who comes a lot on the virtual side, Curtis, says, I so appreciate this. This has been a great service, and I appreciate Westside and Carol and all of the people who gather here virtually. Marilyn Allen adds, so happy there is now a way to participate for us lurkers in this situation. So thank you for this solution. There's also plenty of emojis there too for context.
The problem I see with chatting in an ongoing conversation while Carol is talking is that you miss the next point. You miss part of what she's saying. Personally, and I'm sure we all do, I have a problem that my mind drifts to, did I remember to get the milk did I remember to defrost some chicken, you know, and trying to not let my mind wander to other things so I don't miss some point that she's making. And if people are taking time to type things out while she's talking, they're missing something.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
My response to that is, but now it's recorded. You can watch it again. Like, I mean, literally, I was thinking as I was getting ready to come to gather this morning, I was thinking, I used to not think about this, but now I get up and I think I have to be prepared to be, I have to be TV ready. Mm-hmm. I have to be TV ready because this is recorded. You can go back to, we have a YouTube channel. Westside has a YouTube channel. If you want to see any service that's happened going way back, you just go on our YouTube channel and rewatch it. Mm-hmm. So okay, wow, that's a scary thought, but this is very different, right? So you can be participating, someone who's participating virtually can go ahead and be like, you know what, I'm really hungry. I'm going to just go ahead and get breakfast. I want breakfast now. I'll come back and watch this later. Mm-hmm. That's an option. This is a very different reality, folks. It's a very different reality. Another one?
Yes. Additionally, it's been pointed out, this is from Curtis, the thing we have to remember is we all process differently and we all have a different comfort level. So I know as you were speaking, Judy, I was thinking, like, I type and like I sit over here and knit and do all kinds of things because otherwise I can't pay attention. And I know for a lot of other people that seems to be it as well. And commenting is happening because we're listening as well. There is another comment, but I'm going to hold on to that one. So
Do you have one, Suzanne?
Flip back.
This is going back a bit to why do we need to be here? I raised children in East Tennessee. This was a while ago, but I don't think it's changed all that much. And maybe in the U.S. as a whole, there isn't a sense of you need to be Christian. West High School, there was. And one of my kids was gay and then now trans, the other straight. Didn't matter. For both of them, it was very alienating, and they really needed a safe place. Safe, affirming, you know, where it was normal to not be Christian. That's just the reality of where we in particular are, which is very different than where I've lived other times in my life.
Yep. This one is from Marilyn. What Carol said about ongoing chat during the service reminds me of the old days at Oak Ridge UUC and congregants taking notes during the service for the talk back after the service. So we've just modernized our note-taking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody else in the room have anything you want to share? Sandra?
One of the things I've been thinking about is that I don't know the other congregation, the other congregants. Mm-hmm. I haven't tried to connect with them. I haven't seen their faces. I don't know them. I wonder if there's any way that their faces can be projected while we're in this room and we can see them, because otherwise I don't feel like I'm gathered with them. This is, I guess, a problem within me, but I don't know them, I haven't seen them, and I don't feel like I'm connected to them.
Yeah, that's a very real problem. So one of the technological options is we have to always make a decision between using YouTube to live stream or Zoom. So YouTube is public, Zoom is private, right? So there are pros and cons to both of them. If we were doing Zoom, then it would be completely private, and you would have a different level of confidentiality. So there's a lot of debates about that. And these are things we get to choose. These are things that we get to talk about during the coming months. Like, what do we want to do? If we put screens up here, which we could do, that would only really work if we were doing some kind of gathering space like Zoom or one of the other kinds of gathering spaces. But then it would be a different game as far as total new people going on our channel and being able to watch things. So there's a lot of technology to consider, and Brad, our administrator, already has got some pretty full hands. So there's a lot to think about. And we will continue to talk about those things in the coming months, like how do we want to do that? Yeah. Any more?
A couple of suggestions and a question. There's a question, why don't we use Zoom? As well as a couple of suggestions of putting pictures in the newsletter or in the directory itself, so you can see those other virtual congregants as well. But to kind of circle back, Carol, can you explain why we don't use Zoom?
This is complicated. Brad can explain this better. Maybe for the November blog, I'll talk about the pros and cons of Zoom versus, or an online meeting platform like that versus YouTube. It has to do with who it can reach, right? So YouTube, I can be living in Montana and be like, I'm curious what UU churches are doing. And I can be like, see the title on YouTube of a sermon and I can go watch it. I've actually gotten phone calls from people and emails from people in other parts of the country who are like, I checked out your service on YouTube and I want to give you feedback on it. That doesn't happen with Zoom. Zoom is it's us, we're together, it's private. We can record it so somebody who missed it we can send them the link and they can go watch it, but it's not public, so it's not the same kind of outreach. So this is a way of reaching out to the community and saying, anybody can watch this anytime. It's just pros and cons. Yeah. So maybe one more and then we need to stop.
I don't have anything yet. But that
All right.
doesn't mean it's not coming.
So we're yeah, Elizabeth, did you have something? Come on. Last one before coffee hour hits.
Well, as an organizer for next week in our Reproductive Justice Forum, I'm really anxious to include the online community. And we do, I mean, we've been saying all along we want to have a robust conversation, and we really do want to include people who are participating online. So I'm really interested in getting feedback from both the congregation here and the online participants.
And that forum will be by Zoom. Okay, so if you attend that forum, so the service happens and then there's a little break. There'll be some food here, but there's a break. And then we are actually going to go to a Zoom meeting. We will have the room set up so that there will be a television. You will be able to see the people who are participating virtually. We will all be able to talk to each other. David, did you have something?
As Carol was talking, I was thinking about different congregations, and what came to mind was Halloween trick-and-treating. And I have a very powerful visual memory of sitting in the garage and watching all the lights of kids going around the neighborhood, and then people in costumes come up to you, and they know you're supposed to be able to get candy and stuff when you're doing that. And it's a strange kind of congregation because it's changing, and it's a whole neighborhood. And lots of people you don't know are coming up, but they're all expected and okay. So that's an experience of being able to create a different kind of congregation than all people getting together in the same room. Halloween's one of my very favorite holidays, by the way. I always enjoy it.
So yeah, we get to discuss as a community in the coming weeks and months how we congregate. So thank you all for participating virtually or otherwise in this conversation. Let's be consciously thinking about how we congregate, why we congregate, and what it is that holds our congregation together. Because at the center of every congregation, there's a center. And it can be really helpful to us if we're conscious about what that center is. So the chalice is our representation of the center of our congregation. We're going to extinguish the chalice, but as always, not the light of seeking new inspiration, seeking new wisdom, seeking new truths. Not the warmth of gathering, the connection, or the fire for transformation that it represents. Those go with us into our day, into our week, into our larger communities. Go in peace and passion.